Okay, good evening, everyone. We are about to make a start. As I said earlier, if you can see James's shared screen and you can hear me, then you have got everything you need for this webinar. Thank you so much for giving up your time this evening. I recognise that we are hurtling towards the end of an exceptional year and people are very tired, and you've probably been in school or you've been doing online learning. So hopefully this will be a good hour of your time and you will get lots out of it. Just a couple of housekeeping points from me. So the chat function is limited just to talk to me. If you've got any questions that you want to ask or for me to put to James, then just post those into there and we will stop at various points during the next hour or so, and James will answer those as much as he can. We are recording this session, so if you don't want your video to appear on the recording, can I ask that you turn your video off? We will send the slides out to everybody that's here this evening after the session, so you'll have those to have a look back through, so you don't feel that you need to make lots of notes. There's lots of information on there. I've had a couple of questions already just saying if people haven't attended the first session, does that matter? No, that's absolutely fine. You'll be able to pick up what you need from this session here. And you are also a privileged 613 people, because this is the last in this series that we will be doing talking about this. James has got plans for an autumn series of webinars that will look at different things for continuous provision, but this block of sessions comes to an end tonight. Okay, so my name's Ben Hume. I'm the head teacher at St Paul's Church of England Primary School in Swanley Village, and that is all I'm going to say, really. You're not here to listen to me, you're here to listen to James. So James, good evening and welcome.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ben. Okay, so welcome back. If you've been before, thank you for coming back. And if you're new, I hope we can give you some top tips to take back into your classroom and start thinking about this wonderful thing, that this wonderful wave momentum that keeps on picking up, that people want to change their practice. And this is such a fantastic news. And I'm so glad that people want to listen. And I'm going to give you some ideas around how I've gone about installing continuous provision into my classroom. If you've been to this webinar before, which I know quite a few people have been to part 2 already, I have changed it slightly. There's some new bits and bobs that will be added. I've done my research and I'll show you that as we go through, so I hope you enjoy it. So if you didn't come last week, a couple of weeks ago now, the first thing I want to point you to straight into this direction is 3 fantastic practitioners that you must all go and read these books. If you want to install continuous provision, my top tip straight away is read about it, talk about it, and start to really imagine what it's going to look like in your classroom. And these books are fantastic starting points for that. We've got Year 1 in Action, which is a month by month breakdown of what continuous provision looks like in a Year 1 classroom. It's got some fantastic seasonal ideas as well. So when it gets to Halloween, there's ideas around that. Christmas, Easter, you name it, it's in there. Brilliant book. And Anna's got some fantastic other books if you're in EYFS, in nursery settings, absolutely brilliant. Now, Alistair Bryce-Clegg, everyone knows who's ever been to one of my webinars. I think he's fantastic. I was privileged enough to have him join me last time, which is, when we set out doing this, I never thought we'd get to that point. So I want to thank him again publicly. But also his book on effective transition is what we use effectively to transition our children. If you didn't come last time, we spoke about that in great detail. There's some fantastic, Ben said don't take notes, but there's some fantastic people on here who are all over Instagram who manage to take the most beautiful of notes, and they do generally make fantastic reads. So I'd be delighted if anyone's got those and they're sharing those on Instagram already. But transition, we spoke about transition. If you're particularly interested in that, Charlotte, our EYFS teacher, and I did a podcast on that. Please feel free to go there. And finally, one more addition that I don't think I've mentioned enough or at all really, but I just want to make sure this is coming through. Now, this book has just this week I've gone back to, and when I think about it, it was my starting point as well for what this was a classroom going to look like after transition. It's a beautifully crafted book by Julie Fisher, moving on onto Key Stage 1. If you haven't got it, please go and get it, because I'm going to mention some things throughout this webinar that are directly from her, and it's just a brilliant book. If you missed last week's, a couple of weeks ago's webinar, I want to start off by just pointing out one thing. When we're talking about continuous provision, we're not talking about play being another subject. It isn't another subject. It is the vehicle for what your children are going to use to access the curriculum. It's the way that most of your children are going to make sense of the curriculum. It's the way that most of those gifted children, those children that sometimes struggle to vocalize things, those children that often want to show you creativity but are limited in what they can do in a normal setting, get to show you their understanding of the curriculum. You as the teacher are going to use that vehicle of play to make sure they have access to the curriculum, but it's just so wonderful. It's wonderfully different. It's wonderful just to watch continuous provision happen. I'm going to share some fantastic stories across here, and I'll start with one straight away. Obviously, we've gone to COVID mode at the moment. We're one of the schools that's opened up to our every year group. And in our year one bubble, I was going through some continuous provision notes that, and some outcomes that they had produced just before we broke up in the Small World section. And I found a beautiful letter that a girl in my class had wrote. And it was, and we haven't studied this particular topic, but it was a girl had wrote a letter about women in the world. And this is from a 6-year-old girl. And she had read one of the books in the baskets of books that I have around my classroom, and the wonderful women that changed the world, amazing women that changed the world book, which is a fantastic book. And she had read that, and she wrote a letter to herself saying how she wanted to be one of those children that changed the world, and just because she was a woman, it was not a goal, it wasn't going to hold her back. That was never something I set, but I'll post it later on my Instagram and my Twitter, but it just moved me a bit, because I thought, actually, our children have the opportunity, when you give them the time to make sense of the world around them, to do wonderful things like that. So let's get started and let's think about continuous provision. So we're going to be thinking about the timetable first. Now, timetables, I find, are quite often very restrictive. We want to it almost feels like we want to put things in set orders and say, right, this is what's happening here. This is what's happening here. Do you know the reason for that? Is because we feel like we have control when we do that as teachers. We say, right, this is going to be maths, this is going to be English, and this is going to be your foundation subjects. And like I said, I think the reason we do that as teachers, and I've done that all the way through my teaching career till recently, is that it makes us feel like we're going to get the coverage. Now, one of the questions I get asked all the time about continuous provision is the coverage of the Key Stage 1 curriculum. Do I cover it? My counter argument to that is always, just because you've covered it doesn't mean they've learned it. And you have to bear that in mind when you're thinking about your continuous provision environment. And when you're thinking about teaching in general, just because you taught it doesn't mean it's been learned. I'm going to show you how we've got around that in the next couple of slides. But the first thing I want to talk about is timetable. Now, our timetable is built on these values that we at St. Paul's crafted ourselves when we thought about continuous provision and what it was going to look like. Now, in this session, I'm going to talk about 3 particular things that are relevant to my Key Stage 1 classroom. They are child-initiated learning. This is when children are free to learn in whatever way they like, and I am just going to resource them, and I am going to be the co-player with them. I'm going to have fun. It's the best part of the whole job. When children get into child-initiated learning, you can see their minds going, okay, what am I going to do next? What am I going to do? So child-initiated learning, when we're talking about that, we're talking about children, as you as the facilitator, you're providing an environment where there's no intended objectives, no intended outcomes, but it's an opportunity for children to make sense of the world around them, and for you as the practitioner to really understand what they know and what they're capable of. I find personally that child-initiated time can sometimes get confused with golden time. Please, if you're thinking about using continuous provision, I would separate them completely. Do not think of golden time as, I'd get rid of it out of the timetable, to be honest, because every opportunity to play is an opportunity to learn. And that's what I've stressed and stressed and stressed. So we have child-initiated time. We have adult-initiated activities. Now, adult-initiated activities, as I spoke about last week, are the enhancements to my teaching. That's how I'm going to make sure I push my children towards learning challenges. It's how I'm going to ensure that they're accessing that curriculum to a standard where I know that they know what they're doing. And we have a method called pink sheet assessment, which I'm going to come onto, which tracks if it's managed to stay in their long-term memory. But child-initiated activities are the same as, adult-initiated activities are the same as learning challenges. These are things that I've set them to say, by the end of the week, you're going to be able to do this. You're going to do this and engage with this activity. I ensure they do that by having a chart where they tick their names off. Once they've done it, they have to agree that with an adult. And there's 4 challenges throughout the whole week of adult-initiated learning that will make sure that they are, like I said, accessing the curriculum. And then I have focused groups. Focus groups are my time where I pull off children, I sit with them, and we do things that they're not necessarily going to be taught and learn through the continuous provision. We'll come on to that when I go on to the next slide about timetable and what that looks like. Because I know some of you will straight away be saying, how often do you teach English? How often do you teach maths? That will become hopefully obvious in my next slide. So, spoken about that, adults will learn much more about children, and I find this when you observe them independently, and when they're independent and being self-driven by what they're doing. It's much more effective to observe children in their own activities than when you set them up with something. So for example, if I set them a piece of work and say, right, I want you to do this, just because they've done that doesn't mean they understand it. So what I want them to do is when my adults in the room, I'm blessed to have a fantastic TA in my classroom, Catherine, who I think is actually on this live webinar, which is fantastic to hear. I'm blessed to have her in my classroom, and she will and I will often just walk around in the environment. We will watch children learn. There is no better observation of learning and assessment of learning than watching children play and watching children engage with your adult-initiated activities. Straight away, I spot when I've set an adult-initiated activity and those 2 children that are not quite getting it, I understand that those children are going to need an adult focus group. So I pull them off and put them into an adult focus group. It's so important to differentiate between the 3. Again, child-initiated, there's no intended outcomes. Adult-initiated, there is an intended outcome. And focus group is when I'm going to purely focus on what my assessment has told me. The big thing that drove us is that a learning day has got to be balanced between those things. And there's increased opportunities for me as the teacher to work with particular groups and where I can tailor that to their individual needs. Often as teachers, I think you'll probably, majority of you all probably sat here having just written the worst part of our job, the reports at the end of the year. And you've probably written the statement saying they often can be found drifting away while sat on the carpet and their eyes are elsewhere. Well, actually, when you break that down, some children their attention span can't cope with the fact that you are on the carpet for that long period of time. Some children already know what you're talking about, so actually don't care what you're talking about, and other children haven't got Scooby-Doo what you're talking about. So they are going to be those children that, they're not getting anything out of that. What focus group activities does is it allows you to pull off those children once you've identified them and ensure that actually they're getting the time they deserve and the time they need to really access the curriculum and at a developmentally appropriate level. So let's look at the timetable. So this is my timetable, and as you can see, I have majority of the time is continuous provision. Continuous provision, in my opinion, cannot be, and this is about striking the balance between when you can do it and what you can get away with SLT teams. The big thing is some people will feel very reluctant to dedicate their whole week to effective play and continuous provision. I understand that. You're giving complete control to the children, and that's a scary, scary thought. And this, for us, was the way we were going to do it. We were going to do all or nothing. It's kind of what we die and live by at St. Paul's, all or nothing. So as you can see, the majority, every morning, continuous provision, every afternoon, continuous provision, bar things that I believe as a practitioner and from reading and research, I truly believe that actually are not effectively learned through continuous provision. That's RE. I don't teach RE through continuous provision. I think there's so many things you need to learn through it that actually it's not something that you can just put a set of objects out and say, oh, look at all of these. What do you think about it? What can you get from that? They're not going to get what they need to get from the RE curriculum and to be getting what they need from it. So I don't teach RE through continuous provision. It's taught through whole class teaching. And like I said, whole class teaching still has a place in this. It really does. It can be used as a time to celebrate work that's happened. It can be used just as a communal thing. That lovely moment where you get children sat on the carpet and they're all looking up at you, and you sometimes think to yourself, this is the reason I became a teacher. And you look across them and you see 30 smiling faces. And that's, for me, you still have those moments where you come together as a collective. Yeah, we're Oak Class, and we're going to be learning together. Let's talk about what you did. Oh, Johnny, look what you did last week. That was absolutely fantastic. Who's going to give that a go? And those kind of discussions. Now, in terms of the breakdown of the week, in terms of focus groups, throughout the week, we have 3 focus groups per child on maths, and then 3 focus groups on something to do around writing. And I say that trying not to say English. In my opinion, calculation and place value have to be taught directly. You have to sit with children, and strategies, you have to sit with children to initially teach them. Once you've taught it and you're happy they've taught it, they're going to use it in the environment. Make sure it's in your environment. However, initially it needs to be taught by you, because believe me, children don't naturally go and pull part whole models out and start doing it. You need to get that culture of, right, this is maths, this is great, we need to get this into the classroom. So I don't teach, the 3 focus groups will focus around maths, and 3 focus groups will be focused around writing in a context. And I say that because this is the single greatest way that you can get your children writing. Don't just force them down that narrow route of, we're going to be writing around this book because I've chosen this book, and I want you to do a diary entry because I want you to empathize with this character. No. I will often pull my children off and think about, what are you working on? What are you doing? Giving emphasis to the fact that their play, their child-initiated time is just as important as your adult focus time. If you don't, you're going to be setting yourself up for standards to slip. You're going to get children that come up to you with something that looks like it could have been done in nursery school, and you're expecting year 1 quality work. I'm going to talk about, when we take through the process of installing continuous provision, how I would get around that. So if you've got any questions, that will be answered there. So yes, this is my timetable. As you can see, PE, phonics, I do whole class guided reading. I follow the read, write, ink scheme with reading. Comprehension with year 2. The year 1s follow the phonics scheme, because if you don't know, we teach in a mixed form entry school. So we've got the challenge of having year 1 and year 2 in there. So that's taught through there. And in that time, we also teach handwriting, because although handwriting can be used effectively in continuous provision spaces, I don't believe that it can be taught. They can't just pick it up and start doing it. You need to teach them how, and that's how you end up with beautiful handwriting. Ben, should we stop and take some questions from here?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, James. So first one is somebody has got a reception year 1 and year 2 mix next year. With a head teacher that's not very keen on continuous provision. How would you go around that?
Well, I'd be saying to my head teacher straight away that what alternatives do you have to that? It's a very, very hard question, because if your SLT do not believe in continuous provision, you're going to be facing the uphill battle all the way along your road to trying to get to that spot. I think my answer to that would be, I show them, explain it, bring them on board and try and create something together. Sit down and think, right, I've suggested this. You don't think this is going to work. Let's sit down and think, what does year R1, 2 look like for us? How is it going to be effective? How are we going to ensure that all children at their appropriate developmental levels are going to progress? And that's the only thing I can really suggest to that. I'm really sorry, but I think that's going to be a fantastic class, because I can imagine the year 2s and the year Rs are going to pair up, and there's going to be some fantastic learning happening.
Yeah, just to say that person, I think it was Lisa, but I can't find the message. If you message me again, I'll send you my email address, and I can put you in touch with some people that have got a reception 1 and 2 mix and how they've gone about that. Right, James, next question is, and this was going to come up, how do we do continuous provision when the government are expecting us in rows in September?
Right. There's a lot of myths going around, and a lot of misconceptions around what is expected of us in September. Obviously, the guidance is still relatively raw, and people are still trying to make sense of the guidance. As far as we're aware, and what we've seen, and Alistair Bryce-Clegg's got some fantastic advice on this about sand pits, about water plays. As long as your environment is kept to your bubble, And as long as you're not sharing that bubble, and as long as the materials in that environment are not particularly hazardous materials that are going to pass the virus along, then you can maintain things in your bubble. We are of the mindset that come September, we will just stay in our bubble and we will continue with continuous provision, but just really ensuring that our children are constantly washing their hands inside out. Ben, do you want to add anything on that? Because you've read I feel sorry for every head teacher that's had to do this, but you've had to read the guidance and you've probably made more sense of it than I have.
Yeah, I think you just need to be careful that you're removing things that are quite difficult to keep clean. But the majority of things should, in some way, go back to normal. So classroom bubbles, we intend to teach continuous provision, just as we have done. We're not having rows, and just use your common sense. Really, I think is the biggest thing, and work with your head teacher if you can, and just keep reviewing it. Okay, James. Next question. Can you just give a bit more information about how those focus groups work? So how many people are in it? What do you cover? Does that follow on from the whole class teaching?
Of course. So yes, at the start of the week, so in those, as you can see on my timetable, I've said teacher-led input. And by that, I mean there will be a whole class session. Like I said, I'm not saying get rid of whole class teaching because it's a beautiful thing. But what I am saying is keep them short, keep them sweet, and keep them under 20 minutes, I'd say under 15 minutes, to ensure that all children are active in that learning space. And what I mean by focus groups is that once I've set them off with those that child-initiated time, and I've shown them around my adult-initiated activities that I want them to get on with throughout the whole week, I will then observe, I will then watch, I will then assess, and I will think, actually, what do my children need to be successful this week? What do I know from them from the past week that hasn't gone so well for particular children? And what am I going to do about that this week? I've noticed so-and-so are struggling with place value, so let's go back to that. Let's think about that, and that's why I'm going to pull them off. But actually, I've noticed that they're struggling, but actually this child needs some consolidation on that, so let's pull them into that. I do try to ensure that, like I said previously, that I see children 3 times a week for maths and 3 times a week for some writing in a context. The reason for that is that I want to ensure that my children are reaching those age-expected levels. As a teacher, and I'll mention this in a minute, as the year 1-2 teacher, you have to be aware of those end-of-year expectations. You're guiding that. And the way you do that is through high-quality modelling in the teacher input, as well as adult-initiated activities that are going to show that children can do that once you've taught them there. And if they don't, that's when you pull them off into the focus group.
Thank you, James. There's a lot of questions coming through that I'm trying to answer. So just carry on and we'll come back to some in a minute.
Wonderful. Okay, so here are some pictures. My environment is completely different at the moment in terms of the way that it's been set up for continuous provision and way we're dealing with the whole school opening. So we'll go back. So these are some pictures I took just as we were taking things down. Start with the top left. My outside area has 2 main elements, top left and bottom left. It has an allotment. I'm very, very lucky to have an allotment. I know that. And it also has a deconstructed role play area. Believe in deconstructed play as much as possible. When we did the Great Fire of London, I spoke about this last time. The most beautiful thing is when children make the Great Fire of London around you, and it happens just from deconstructed tires and deconstructed wheels and deconstructed piping. The imagination begins to flow. Things start happening, and beautiful things start happening, and you start to see them using that whole class input, using the adult initiated input, and in their child initiated activities that have no intended outcome from you, they start doing those things. And believe me, when you've got a class hooked, and this is why it's so important to pick topics that you know as a practitioner are going to set alight their imaginations. Great Fire of London is a fantastic one. I'm so looking forward to getting back in September because we're doing Neil Armstrong, we're looking at the Bigu book, we're looking at The Man on the Moon, and we're doing those fantastic, that fantastic topic of space where children's imagination starts going wild. But in that deconstructed play, you need to ensure that when they're doing child-initiated activities, that you can support them and be that co-player. And then in that co-player role, it is just purely up to you to almost agree with them. We have what I hate for people to do and get from this is that you go up to them and question everything they're doing. Please don't do that. Don't question them all the time. Yes, there is a place for effective questioning, no doubt about it. You've probably done essays on it at university when you're studying to be a teacher. Yes, there is effective questioning, that happens in my classroom. But when they're playing in that child-initiated activity, I find sometimes I've watched people who have come into the classroom, or I've gone to see classrooms where effective questioning turns into interrogation, and it turns into this whole idea of what are you doing? Why are you doing it? Why does that not link to the Great Fire of London? Well, because I don't want it to link to the Great Fire of London. And sometimes that's going to happen. Give you an example. Before we broke up, I was in my outside area and I was just watching, and two children got these, you can see at the bottom right of that picture of my outside deconstructed area that I've got wooden reels. They stacked those up, and the other child stacked up some tyres, and they got the piping from the right-hand side of that picture, and they pretended they were fishing. And I'm not joking, they sat on this chair and they were holding this pipe for a good 10, 15 minutes and just fishing. And I said, what are you doing? And they said, we're fishing. So I said, okay, great. And I walked away, and all the time I'm thinking, okay, God almighty, if someone walks in now and they see them and they're sat with pipe in between their legs, sat on these tyres, what are they going to think they're doing? What are they going to think? I've started this kind of preschool nursery in my classroom where they should be, they're doing the SATs in a couple of weeks' time. What the hell am I doing? What we did there is that I spotted that those boys, I spoke to them afterwards, and they'd both been fishing that previous weekend, and they were obsessed with it. Now, what I did is I used that assessment. I look at what they're doing. I think, right, that's the interest. They love fishing. Right, what can I do with that? So what happened was from there is that I pulled that into my adult focus groups. Now, what I'd spotted about one of those children, in that fishing group, was that one of them really, really struggled with creative writing in terms of using adjectives and using expanded noun phrases. And they were in year 2. So we pulled them off, and when we were doing our focus group, it was a one-to-one, because I've used that time. My TA is doing a focus group. I've used my time to start pulling off children and really focusing on what they're doing. And so what I would do is we'd have a conversation. We had a conversation around, let's describe your fishing trip. Let's really think about that. And straight away, I've got a hooked child that wants to talk about their fishing. Because one, they can talk about it from experience, because children write best when they talk from experience. And two, a child that has an understanding that I've spent that time observing what they're doing. I didn't interrogate them. I didn't say, right, what you're doing is wrong. You need to go and be practicing conjunctions because, that's a year 2 objective and you must do it. I didn't do that. I just used what they knew, what news that their interest, and pulled them towards that. But yeah, we digress. I'm going to start telling stories left, right, and centre. Right, so in the middle of the picture, we have what I call shadows. I think Early Excellence used something similar. We looked at this, we saw them in the classroom, and we absolutely loved them. And what it is a mechanism for getting the classroom tidy again at the end of the day. I love a messy classroom. I think there's nothing better than a messy classroom. I often find, I said this last time, that you can often get drawn into looking at Instagram accounts that are so stunning and so beautiful, and you feel bad if your classroom doesn't have that because you feel like you're letting down your class. You're not. As long as your classroom has got your children at the centre of it, and you've got effective resources in your environment that are going to forward the children's learning, then you are on for a winner. Your environment can get as messy as possible, and it will be a most effective environment as possible. Now, what this does is that I have a shadow underneath each object in my continuous provision and in my environment. And at the end of the day, I just want them to put it back where it belongs. I've tried to make, and I sometimes look at this and think, did we do the right thing? As you can see, we've got some writing on there that says half a litre equals 500 millilitres. Is it effective? Maybe not the most effective thing, but it is something that we're going to be thinking about. If we don't need it, it doesn't need to be there. But you could do that to get that immersive experience of, language, of maths everywhere. This is the same as this. So it can be important that you value that. The bottom, this is the last thing I'm going to put your attention to, is the national curriculum. Now, this is the problem. With Key Stage 1, we are always, when we talk about continuous provision, coming back to that coverage idea, and, oh my goodness, how are you going to get through all those statements in national objectives? Now, you can't really see that picture. I understand that, and I'll try and post that if I can. What that is that I've gone through the national curriculum for measurement. I've looked at the national curriculum for measurement, and I've highlighted where there are opportunities in my provision that they are going to be able to show me that they understand that. They are in all my cupboards around my classroom. There's one for measurement, there's one for science, just tucked in behind the, on the back of the investigation zone. There's also things around writing on back on my small world to ensure that there's opportunities. Right, where are they getting access to conjunctions? Where can I provide them with some good modelling, books that are going to show conjunctions? Where am I going to get opportunities to do that? So I always have that as a top tip. So one last thing on the environment, when you're setting it up around your timetable, is when you're setting up the environment, be a co-constructor. You know, this time of year, you'll be going into your classrooms in the next couple of weeks to get it ready for your next year group. I often think sometimes the best environments are created when you construct them with your children. And that's what happened to our environment. The environment we started with when we started our journey in continuous provision is completely different to what it is now, because the children are co-constructors with us. If you give them that environment and be the co-constructor with them, they're going to be more willing to use the environment in a way that it's intended to be used for. If you don't, and you just set it up thinking, right, this is it. And if I just set to that national curriculum objectives and said, that's it, that's all we're going to put in here, then it would not be an environment that children want to learn in. An example of that is, for example, in the cooking corner, the children absolutely love using the cooking, but they said to me, Mr. Johnson, you know what would be great? If we had a blender. And I said, well, what do you mean? They said, we can make milkshakes. And I was like, well, I'll get you that if you promise me that every time you use that blender, that you're going to make a recipe for it. And you're going to use what we've spoken about when it comes to writing recipes. And every time now, we have a group of children that will sit down, they will focus on their writing, they will use those things we've spoken about when we've spoken the modelled instruction writing. Ben, I'm going to come back to you before I'm going to go through my step-by-step process of installing continuous provision. I'm going to run out of drinks soon. You're on mute.
Thank you. How many White Rose maths objectives would you get through in a week?
Oh, interesting. It depends. White Rose, by the way, have just completely redone their material, and they've put dots and signs as to what are the most vital things that children, the key concepts that children need to cover throughout the year. And I think that is a nod to the fact that we know children are going to be behind where they need to be. But I would now use those as my key kind of fundamentals about what points am I going to teach. In terms of how many statements, sometimes 2, sometimes 3, sometimes 1. I can't give you a definitive answer. What I can say is that we do get through the White Rose scheme. I won't cover every single objective. I'll sometimes just leave it to my environment and make sure and observe they're doing it. But I won't directly teach every step.
Thank you. James, next question. What's the expectation for evidence in books?
Evidence in books comes up next. And also we have a podcast coming out at the end of the week on the independent journals that people have been seem to like the idea of. We've got a whole podcast coming out. I try to do, I'll be honest, I don't really understand how Instagram works still. I was talking to my colleague at Bronny earlier about how it works. I'm still trying to get to grips with that. I tried to do a Q&A kind of slash thing last night on it. I don't know if that was effective or not. But we'll go through that in a minute. I'll just, for the sake of time, I won't answer that question here.
But James, I think it's fair to say that there's not an expectation that we need recording every day.
No, definitely not. We don't use anything like Tapestry. We don't use anything around, I often call them calendar books. There's no expectation around that every date is going to be right. 2nd of July, 3rd of July, maths, 4th of July, English. There's no expectation around that at all.
Okay, James, going back to the adult-led tasks, what happens if children don't want to do it?
If they don't want to do it, then I'm going to pull them back in for a focus group, and we're going to talk about and think about together how we're going to make it accessible for them. If they don't want to do it, I need to still make sure that child has access to the national curriculum. It's my responsibility as a teacher to ensure that's happening. So what I'll do is I'll sit down with them and we'll talk about the activity. If that doesn't work, I've got to think on my feet as a practitioner and think, right, if this isn't working and this isn't engaging, first and foremost, I need to put that in the back of my mind and think next week I've got to make sure that this is engaging to my learners and this particular child hasn't found this engaging. But then I'll bring them back into that focus group, like I said. We'll talk about it. We'll look at the key skills that are underlined in that adult initiated task, like the fishing example, where I'd get them to practice those skills, but hook them around an interest of theirs.
Sorry, I must just say, someone was talking to me on the chat around daily recording, and one of the senior leaders in this person's school is asking for daily evidence for Ofsted and for book moderations. Oh. I must just say, we had Ofsted in January 2020. None of that was asked for whatsoever. There was no expectation for daily recording. It just did not come up. So if someone's beating you about needing moderation evidence or needing for Ofsted, they don't want it. We got a good in Ofsted. It was just a Section 8 one-day visit. Someone else has just put that in. James, how long are the adult focus groups?
Maximum 20 minutes, no longer. If and this is a good point, actually. Sorry, I forgot to raise this. I should have raised this. If during that focus group, if I've set them up with an activity that I think, right, I want to stretch these children, for example, and they've got adding and using the column method, what I will start then is what I've started to call a shadow group. And that shadow group will go off as a group, collective, and work on that activity by themselves. And I will then almost say, actually, right, I'm comfortable that these children are going to be absolutely fine with this activity. So I just want them to stretch it and consolidate that. And sometimes that happens.
Okay, and then last question, which I'll answer. Someone's asked whether we track objectives and things like that. As a school, we do no objective tracking whatsoever. As a head teacher, I don't personally think it has any benefits. And what you end up with is teachers just getting to a data drop point and just saying, right, oh yeah, they've all got that, they've all done this. We just use standardized testing 3 times a year from year 1 up to year 6. And then we do a really thorough gap analysis. So the whole team around that child will sit down and talk about the class and the children. So teacher, teaching assistant, Senko, if someone hears them read as a reading volunteer, anything like that. So a real team to look at next steps and how well they've done.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ben. Okay, so step by step, how are you going to get this started? I've added this slide in. So if you come to this chat, this is the first time we've done this. So I hope this makes sense. So first of all, when you're installing continuous provision, we're going to go with arrows. We're going to go in a direction. We're going to be going forward because this is the right thing to do, in my opinion. So 2 things that I always use either side of my direction and where I'm heading is research informed. I pointed you in the direction of some wonderful practitioners, Bryce-Clegg, Julie Fisher and such. There is so many people that are trying to jump on this and have so much expertise. Everything I do is informed by what they are doing, and sometimes I feel like a bit of a fraud because I'm actually just saying what I've learned. This isn't something we've tried to create independently. This is something we've just made sense of what they've put in the hours and the research into to doing. So it's research informed. It's looking at what others are doing and staying informed. Some of the best ways you can do that: get on Twitter if you're not, get on Instagram if you're not, and follow other practitioners. There's some fantastic practitioners on Instagram that are doing continuous provision in year 1 and 2 and are absolutely wonderful at it. And, you know, I would even hands up miles apart from where I am at my journey, because we're all on our individual journeys to installing it. The other thing is use feedback from specialists, visitors, invite them in. We often invite Kent's specialist teachers around early years into the continuous provision in year 1. We invited other people of significance into the environment, say, what do you think about this? And just have those honest conversations. Governors as well. I'm a governor. I'm a school governor at our school. I'm also a governor at another school. And I think there's nothing better than inviting governors in so they know what's happening. Because when Ofsted come round, if someone's already asking about Ofsted, when Ofsted come round, if your governors are going to be talking about what's happening and why it's happening, that's much more effective than saying, yeah, we just agree with everything that's happening at the school. They can talk firsthand. I've seen this. It works. Bring parents in. Invite them in to see it. Always bring your parents on board. You know, be transparent about everything you're doing with them. And listen to the children. Listen to the children in your environment. They're your biggest critics, but they also will rub your ego when you need it rubbing. They are fantastic when you want some honest advice, because children do not have a filter when it comes to feedback. So please, those 2 things, while we're going through this step by step, bring those on board. So the first thing is make the classroom as independent as possible. Some of you are going to ask me in the next couple, I can guarantee you, you're thinking about typing, what do I do if I have not got a TA? What do I do if I haven't got a teaching assistant that's there all the time? Well, you have to invest the time at the start of the year making that environment as independent as possible. You have to make sure that the resources that you're expecting the children to use are there for them to use, not tucked away in your teacher cupboard that's full and every time you open it, it's falling on you. No, you need to make sure that it's out there. And, some people do it in beautiful wicker baskets with Hessian backgrounds. You don't need that. Just make sure it's out. Make sure it's out there. Make sure it's, when we were building our environment, we got on eBay and we found lots of furniture that was going to work for us. It doesn't have to be the expensive stuff. Don't feel like you have to buy into particular companies that are going to charge you ridiculous amounts of money for those environments. You don't have to do that. Please don't do that. If you want to get it started and someone's saying we can't do it because of the budget, don't let that be the barrier to doing this way of teaching. So yeah, make it independent. Show the children around. Like I said, construct it with the children. Then once you've done that, you want to iron out the little things that are causing the barriers to independence. So an example for me is that I was thinking to myself, oh my goodness, why are they not writing? Well, actually on hindsight, I probably didn't make that environment, it didn't have enough writing opportunities to start with, if I'm brutally honest. So what I did about that is that I started making these yellow sheets of writing. And what they were was just yellow pieces of what we photocopied, lined paper onto it, or writing frames, and just put them around the environment to start that kind of motion flowing. We also, if that's causing the problem, you need to teach them. You need to do that job, that initial part. So for example, I always tell the story, small world. I didn't have a small world to start with. Rookie error, have a small world. I don't know if they're in my room anywhere. I've just had a whole Amazon delivery of little figures that have come in and landmarks. They're fantastic. It's on Amazon, like famous landmarks that are going to go into my small world area. And you need to be, if you spotted a problem, iron it out straight away at the start of the year. And this is going to be even more relevant with the fact of what's happened. Children have missed a significant amount of time. So you're going to have to invest, if you want effective continuous provision, you're going to have to invest so much time at the start of the year into making that classroom as independent. You want that effectively, you want the classroom working in the absence of yourself. And that's what we want. The end goal of continuous provision is for that to happen. Although you're not trying to do yourself out of a job, and that's why I stress the importance of whole class and focused and adult initiated activities. So once you've done that and the classroom's working, that's when I'd start to say, bring in those adult initiated tasks, those learning challenges that I'm going to show you in a second, what I do. Start to bring in the curriculum, feed it in. Now you could do that at the start. You can introduce, not the challenges, but you can introduce the topics and start getting them excited about welcome to year one. You know what? In year one, we're going to learn all about this fantastic and horrifying event that happened in 1666 and start them having that conversation. But those adult initiated activities, you want to start putting around your room and testing your ability as a practitioner, because this is going to test you. But I think I've got a quote about this at the end of this step-by-step guide. But you want to be thinking, what's working well for my children when I set adult initiated activities? So for example, at the start of the year, I used to set these activities that were very, there's a definitive answer. You must answer it like this because I need you to tick this objective off, that the similarities and differences between physical and human features in geography. Well, actually, that's very narrow, and it's not open to, open-ended answers. And if your adult activities are not enabling that to happen, you're not going to get high quality adult initiated learning. What you're going to get is a case of a parrot in your classroom that's just repeating what you're saying, and you don't want that. You want children to be independent and answering in the way they want, they can and what they know. So once you've done that, then start to introduce the adult focused activities. Now, by this point, by step 4, you have managed to ensure that there's an independent environment, that the adult initiated activities are set up. They know, the children are used to the routines. They know how it works in your classroom. They know the expectations. I probably haven't said that word as much as I do on my normal webinars, but expectation is key. If your expectation is not there around those previous steps, by the time you get to wanting to install your adult focus groups, you're going to get queues of children. Ben and I laugh about this because previously, when I did formal teaching, I used to get queues and queues and queues of children. I finished, Mr. Johnson, what can I do next? I finished, Mr. Johnson, what can I do next? If that's happening, that to me sends alarm bells and makes me think, right, I need to pause my adult focus groups. I need to go back a step and think, what haven't I done correctly to ensure that it's open-ended enough to keep these children engaged for one, but also to challenge them when, and always gets that, the ability never to have the definitive answer. You want the children to be responding in as many ways as possible and not to be stopped when they say, right, I think we're finished. You don't want that. You want them to be constantly, learning is an ongoing process. We're learning now. And, you need to encourage that and foster that with our children. Once you've done that, like I said, go back, constantly reflect, always be thinking about what is the environment doing. And if you need to change the provision, the one way I put it sometimes is about a supermarket. And your continuous provision, your effective provision is the general layout of the classroom. It's the general classroom, get my words through, long day. And the general layout of the supermarket is your effective provision. Now, supermarkets, to hook you in, always have those special offers. So let's say your cereal's 2 for 1, and that for me, is your enhancements. That's your adult initiated activities. That's the thing that's going to spark that learning on. That's the activities that you're going to bring over and say, right, look what I've done. And yes, it has an adult objective to it. It has an intended objective to it, sorry, but you want to bring them over and excite them with those adult initiated activities. And if you're a school that's trying to plan things, and we'll talk about planning in a minute, Ben is very, I'm not just saying that because he's here, but Ben is very, very, I think flexibles probably doesn't even do it justice, Ben. For one of my Ofsted lessons that they came to see, my planning was on a post-it note of what I was going to do in that lesson and what I was going to achieve throughout that lesson, and what I intended to do with my focused children was on a post-it note. Ben isn't the kind of head teacher that will say, I need to see this, I need to see it on a Sunday, because the problem with that and effective continuous provision is that if you're putting your Sunday into your SLT, or you're planning into your SLT on a Sunday, the thing about continuous provision is by Wednesday, that would have all changed. Children will decide their own learning journeys, and by Wednesday, I guarantee you won't know where it's gone, and you basically end up typing some format for some SLT member to tick over at the end of every week. Why do that? Why waste your time? I know I'm probably talking to the people that know that and want to change that, but if you are one of those people, just consider it. I'm not SLT bashing, I promise. So my final thing on that step by step is this, and this, if you are a SLT, it probably would be my message to you. If teachers are not allowed periods of trial and error, then there will be no growth. Teachers will remain safe. Teaching will remain safe and predictable. I know this. Like I said, I'm not rubbing Ben's ego at all. We tried continuous provision before and it failed. We tried because we thought effective continuous provision was removing desks and tables. We thought that was it. We spent a summer day taking out all the tables from my classroom, and we put some activities in there that were just adult initiated activities, and we thought that was effective continuous provision. If I look back on this step by step that I've just told you, the things lacking there were the fact that I didn't give it the time, and I went straight into focus groups. So every time I was doing a focus group, I had children coming up to me and saying, Mr. Johnson, I don't know what to do now. Mr. Johnson, I've done this. So it wasn't effective, and I wasn't using the research. I wasn't looking around. I wasn't looking at the fantastic literature that's out there. So if you're an SLT member or you're a teacher that believes in this is so important. Try just the best thing that we did again. We picked ourselves back up after it failed and started again. Ben, do you want to just interject there? I know we're really running out of time. This bit's just on evidencing and documenting.
Yeah, so James, lots of people saying if you had to prioritise resources, particularly for the outside area, with a very limited budget, what would you do?
Limited budgets are out of something we can do well. We don't have a limited budget, but we've done really
like it.
Resourcing our outside area. We've decided to spend the whole day in the summer skip diving. We knocked on people's doors and asked for things out of skips. We went to the local mechanics and we asked for tyres. So reels, tyres, piping, things that are not, I would always favour that over going onto Amazon and buying a Great Fire of London Pudding Lane sign. I'd favour that over going onto eBay and buying a spaceship because I'm doing Neil Armstrong. Get the children creating it, and it saves you money, a lot of money.
And then, James, a question. Someone has had successful continuous provision in year one and has now been tasked with moving it into year two. How would you make that look different to the previous year they've had?
Yeah, well, you and I have a webinar, podcast on that, another plug. But what I would say is that year two is slightly different in terms of you have got that big elephant in the room of the SATs. I would ensure that you're using that assessment more rigorously in terms of just those particular end of year objectives, the framework. Make sure that you're constantly reflecting on those and making sure that there's opportunities in your adult initiated activities that's going to get you the evidence that you need. And evidence doesn't necessarily mean writing. Because I mean, at the age of 6 and 7, writing is actually a relatively useless piece of evidence, if I'm honest, because, their knowledge and the way they can talk about things, their writing is nowhere near that. you know, they're 6 and 7. Developmentally, they can't write the way that they would talk, or they would draw, or they would do other things. So you need to get around that. And this is why you need to bring SLT on board, is that evidence is sometimes going to come across not in the form of written evidence. And that's why we have things that I'm about to share, with things like independent journals and opportunities to show that. But yes, year 2, make sure you're focused on the objectives, lots and lots of assessments, focus activities on things that are, you know, those fundamentals that are going to get you, you know, we do have to do SATs, but those fundamental things that are going to get them children to pass SATs, you're going to need to dwell on more. Let's be honest. You're going to need to be focusing on your place value. You're going to need to be focusing on your things in reading, for example. That's why we do whole class reading. So you set things up that are designed to tackle those barriers that we have. And, you know, there's a whole movement at the moment of removing Key Stage 1 SATs. Hope it goes well. You know, I have no problem with SATs at the moment, because I feel my children by the end of the academic year are set up well enough to do it, and I have no problem with them doing it. Should we? I know we're at time, Ben, so can I?
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, okay, so I'm going to try and whiz through this bit. Documenting. People have asked about this, and I have said we're doing a podcast on this on Sunday. It's coming out. And we have 2 free books. I just haven't put the maths book on there, because our maths book is everything that comes from an adult-initiated activity that's related to maths, or everything that comes from a focus group goes into my maths book. It goes in there because, like I said, I don't believe that children can naturally start doing strategies and place value without you having to teach it. So it goes straight into a maths book when they come into a focus group or an adult initiated activity that deliberately focuses on that. But these are the 2 main things that people often want to hear about: the independent journal and the curriculum journal. 2 completely separate books, 2 fantastic pieces of evidence for moderation at the end of the year, and 2 fantastic books that when you take to cluster moderation, people are like, wow, what's that? Because it's that thing that's going to make you stand out. Because I love it. Because when I say I don't touch this book, people often don't believe me, but it's genuine. I don't. And we'll show some examples of that on Sunday. But I've just had a virus sign come up. We're going to ignore that. The key principles behind independent journals is that the journals are only for the children to use. These are the independent journals, so they belong solely to the children. I haven't put this on here, but one of the things that people found quite fascinating about the way I set this up is that I have a journal too at the start of the year. And you know that process that I spoke about back here, making the classroom as independent as possible, in that period of time, I'm creating my journal with the children. I'm showing them, I'm modeling to them. Yes, they might copy what I'm doing some of the times, but that's fantastic practice. Not every child gets a journal straight away, and they have to earn it. I know that by the end of the autumn term, they will get an independent journal, but I just need to make sure they're aware that this is something rather special. You know, up until this point, you haven't had anything like this. I'm trusting you as one of the learners in our class to use this well. So they were designed to document their children's own learning. We don't use anything like tapestry. We don't use anything like that, simply because we have these. And what these are is just opportunities for the children. So if they're working on something that means a lot to them, and it's adding value to that child-initiated time, they can document that. So we teach them how to take photos on iPads. We teach them how to upload that to a computer, and we teach them to print it. Then we teach them to trim it, and then we teach them to stick it. We do not touch it. I don't do the sticking. Why would I waste my time sticking things into books? It's a waste of time. It's not teaching and learning. So I train the children right at the start of the year. We've got child trimmers that children can use. And they're really, they love them because they feel like they're a teacher, which says a lot about what we do spend quite an awful lot of our time doing, trimming. But yes, you need to ensure that you've taught them, you have the expectation. So that's why I have my independent journal at the start of the year, and I play. It's the best part of the year. I just play, and sometimes they join me. I don't have an intended outcome. I don't think, oh, okay, right, they've all come over to join me. How am I going to get conjunctions here? No, I don't think about that. I think, right, what am I going to do to make sure I show them this is a place where they can feel safe, and then document that learning that they're doing. As I said, I'll go back to that initial quote that someone quoted me last time, and I loved it because I didn't even realize I said it, but it makes so much sense, is that every opportunity to play is an opportunity to learn. So yes, this is sometimes the thing we don't see is, this is to document those things we don't see, because sometimes they want to go to small world, they'll huddle around it, and they'll be, moving the figures around, then they'll write about it and then move it back, and I don't get to see that. So if they write about it and stick it into that journal, I can see it. I don't mark it. It's not marked. I don't Ben, again, we're very kind of, we have an active dialogue around everything. And, you know, when we spoke about the independent journals, it was important to us that children, again, going back to that whole idea of questioning, feedback and interrogating, and make sure you don't fall into the later. It was really, really important for us to make sure that these didn't become books that children felt they had to perform to the expectations of the curriculum, because sometimes the best learning happens when, you know, children just do it by themselves, and, you know, they create these wonderful things. Like, I've had stories where we're covering the, you know, the topic might be natural lands and places around the world, but, you know, I've had some fantastic stories that have taken place about princesses and castles, and being the brave princess who saves the knight, which is a fantastic, you know, what you want children to be doing and documenting. And the resources are out all the time for children to use these, to use them to make these learning journals. I'll show you some examples. There are some examples on my Instagram about what they look like. I'm not sure if I've got any in here, but
James, I've got some. Do you want me to try and share?
If you can, that'd be great.
The
time. I'm really, really sorry.
Sorry.
Talk an awful lot.
Can you see that? Is that coming up?
Yeah. This is Logan's book. So Logan has documented his journey. This is where Logan got a book relatively early on. He is, you know, using those stickers and post-it notes that we've got. He's created something in the deconstructed outside area. And Ben, can you just turn back to that quickly? I can explain about it. Is that you can see that he's my bridge and river. So we're doing physical and human features, and he's made that outside, and the post-it notes attached to it are him explaining what that is. Like, so the River Thames, and he's explained about what he's used and why he's used it to make the River Thames, because we're doing physical and human features, and a bridge. So he's used that, what is a human and physical feature. Then if we turn over, he's written a story. So this is the Sad Lion. So he probably, knowing Logan, he probably created this in the small world and then turned it into a fantastic piece of writing. We've got some children when they decide to do art, which is something we're working on with our children. But Logan was relatively new. So this is a child that joined us later on and has, you know, done some fantastic, I can see all of you now, how scary. And I need to share my screen. And we'll go back to, so yeah, relatively early on, and he's already doing things like that. So they're used as an honest reflection. I take them to moderation. I have no shame about taking them to moderation, because moderation should be a process of honesty. It should be a reflection. I found that out because when I had my first ever Key Stage 1 moderation, I let's be honest, Ben, I think Ben will probably cringe at this story. I was in tears before. This is the formal teaching. When I did formal teaching, I was in tears because I was so nervous about moderation and the process. And I'd done that thing where, you know, off my own accord, I'd post-it noted to make sure I had evidence of absolutely everything, because it's aware they could choose any single child. And I was so nervous. And we found out the moderator, and you do that thing you do as teachers, you Google them, you Facebook them to try and find out who your moderator is. What do they look like from their profile picture? Do they look scary? That kind of thing. And then when the day came, it turned out that she was ill, so they had to send the Kent lead for moderation, which obviously sent me into a bit of a panic. But what I learned from that is that moderation is a process of honest reflection, honest assessment. If you're not honest about it, and you know, they trust you, and that, from my personal experience, they trust you as an honest practitioner to say, like, this is their work, this is the evidence of their work, let's have a conversation. And if it's not in the book, you could talk about it. But the reason why I have the curriculum journals go alongside that, moving on to this, is that the curriculum journal is that opportunity to show that children can do it when, you know, you're there supporting them. It's the curriculum journal is more aligned with your normal book that you have for subjects. Now, what it is that every single subject goes in there apart from maths and RE. Every single subject goes in there: computing, art, RE, English, and everything other than those subjects I mentioned go into that book. It becomes a beautiful kind of reflection of what they've done during that term. It contains their responses to focus group activities. It also contains their responses to adult initiated activities. So I try to make sure that if I've set up an adult initiated activity, there's an opportunity to document it. One of the things I learned through moderation is that evidence doesn't have to be written down. You can take pictures of children doing it, and it counts as just as perfectly good moderation evidence. So please be aware of that. Like I said, all subjects other than RE, maths, phonics and reading don't go in there. but everything else does. And the children get a new one of these books, curriculum journals per topic. And like I said, there's 4 outcomes, child-initiated activities for a week. And that's not including your adult-focused activities that might appear in there. So just some of the things that we have around. So as you can see, the bottom left is where we've created the independent journal section. You can see the trimmers there, the children use, the independent journals there, and those yellow sheets of writing. Can you, when I spoke about those yellow opportunities to write, we talk about those all the time. There's your yellow opportunity to write. Make it obvious, stand out. If you're saying to children, this is my expectation, look, I'm putting these everywhere, they're eventually going to get the hint that you need them to do that for you. One of the most used resources that I have is this top left one, which is my collection of writing frames. And now these are not just there because if I leave them there, children are not going to pick them up out of their own choice. They are there as a kind of, they're next to Small World deliberately. So when children are using Small World, they can then go on and use that to write a letter, write a diary, and the writing frames are there to support that. But most commonly, as you can see in the picture on the right, they can be found in an area that I think that there's a writing opportunity. So for example, this is next to my cooking area. There's the recipe template. There's a writing frame, sorry, that I've got. Now that written thing on the wall is where in a focus group, I've noticed that a couple of the children are struggling with using instruction and writing instructions. So we've spoken about how we're going to do that. And we've put the evidence up on the wall, and that's what they're going to use when it comes to writing. Again, co-construct the environment with your children, and it becomes an environment that children are going to use to further their own learning. So quickly, meeting those objectives for the end of the year. Make sure every member of adult in your classroom is aware of the framework. If you're a year 2 teacher, particularly make sure they are aware. Pupils' work has to be independent to count for moderation. What better way than having an independent journal that you haven't touched, and you can say to the moderator, this is their independent journal, and this is what I'm going to show you what they can do. The work also comes from a wide range of subjects. So you're writing, you can show them their scientific report, you can show them their story, you can show them a recipe, you can show them a newspaper article about, again, going back to those group of children that seem to love fishing for some reason, you can show them that diary writing that they've done on fishing. And then modelling expectations in the environment. First and foremost, get into the environment, play with them, write with them, do maths with them. Like, get in there. If you're going to make maths in your area and you're saying, yeah, my environment really supports the teaching of maths, well, go and model that. Go and do that. Go and do it for fun, play. And then finally, and this is what I came back to earlier, is that if you rely on what children write as evidence, and you think this is what they know they can do, then your evidence is going to be grounded on really shaky ground, because all you're looking at when you're looking at a child's piece of writing is their writing development. You're not looking at their scientific or geographical knowledge. You're looking at how well they can put those thoughts to writing, and often their writing development is below their subject knowledge. So we need to be aware of that. The other thing I'm going to probably, I'll quickly whistle top through this. Sorry, I'm going to 1:15 and I promise I'll stop. And the other thing I'm going to say is that these are pink sheet assessments, the things I spoke about. These can be adult focused. They mainly are adult focused. What they are is that every so often, once I've taught something, I'll leave it about 3 weeks and then I'll come back to these. What these are, pink sheet assessments, is that they're me testing to see and assessing if the child's long-term memory has been altered. I quoted Ofsted there, if anyone wants evidence to take with their SLT. Use that. What it is that, for example, with the leaf one, I had taught that about 3 weeks prior to this, the parts of a plant, and then I pulled a group of children off and said, look, I just really want to quickly see what you know and what you remember. And then we stick that straight into the curriculum journal, and it's instant feedback. I don't thank you, off you go. If they've got it wrong, we talk about it and we correct those issues. And it ranges in maths. I use it every so often to look at this week, last term, last week, last year. Again, checking long-term memory is so effective because you can identify those gaps early on and instantly create an intervention that's going to support and bridge those gaps. This is what my learning, this is a slide from when I first started doing it. So this is 6 challenges that I had. Now I will post a better example of this. I need to change this actually, but this is a learning challenge sheet that we used, again, with the adult initiated activities on it. Nothing else. I'd be lying to you straight to your face if I said the children naturally do these things in child initiated. They don't. You need to make sure you push them towards these in that adult initiated. Call it what it is. It's adult initiated play, and that's fine. That's absolutely fine, as long as you have that opportunity for child-initiated play and it's balanced alongside, obviously, your adult focus groups. There are challenges for both year 1 and 2. There's differentiation through using our progression maps that we have across school. I know people have been interested in that over my Instagram over the past couple of weeks in terms of what does that look like. Ben, we're in the process of we're going to upload our new overviews and progression maps, aren't we, to the school website. So when that's made available, I'll post a link and you can see our progression maps and our overviews. We have coverage. Like I said, just because you taught it doesn't mean that it's been learned, but we do cover every area of the national curriculum over a 2-year cycle because we're a mixed form entry school. And the activities that I provide on here have minimum instructions, are well modelled, and have and most of the time, and need to have open-ended possibilities. And if they don't, then you're not going to get effective adult provision. So here we are. This is the final slide. I'm going to leave it on. Just some lovely memories of continuous provision over the course of the year. Again, you can see that mixture. Bottom left, 2 children that absolutely love woodwork. So they're in the construction area. That's a child-initiated time. They've decided to go off. Focus group activities with me in the top left. Again, those children that I said agreed to write a recipe every time they did blending and making recipes. Again, an adult initiated activities at the bottom where I said, right, we're going to do a roll on the wall this week. Let's have a go at this, because we follow the power of reading. So you can bring some of those fantastic activities into those adult initiated activities. As long as you model it, we model what a roll on the wall is and we spoke about it, and then you get them doing it. Again, sometimes people say to me, how do you get them doing maths? Well, they do it when you make it that whole class input. Sometimes you just engage with it and you get excited about it. So there's a girl in my class who I said, he's the same girl who wrote the Fabulous Women about girls in my class, girls around the world. She's that girl. She's done some fantastic maths. And like you say, again, the bottom picture is another child just engaged. And I think she's doing sharing there. It just happens. And you walk around and you think, well, I haven't told them to do this, but they're doing it. And that's a wonderful thing when children decide to do it by themselves. And that only comes when you have the respect of the child-initiated time, and you respect that play. You respect the fact that the children need to access your adult-initiated time, and you assess it, and you have focus groups to further their knowledge. I think everything else we're probably going to cover in web podcasts later on down the line. So I'm going to take some final questions, Ben, and then let's say we'll take 5 minutes of questions and then we'll finish.
No, James, these people need their tea and they need their evening. And
okay, well, in which case we will stop.
So bring it to an end and we'll answer it in the podcast.
Okay, so yeah, just to wrap it up. Like I'd say, thank you for coming, first and foremost. Like I said, it's a wave of momentum that's picking up pace. Get on board. It's going to be well worth the journey. If I can do anything, you can, let's go right back to the beginning. You can tweet me at Mr. J Primary, or you can Ben underscore Mr. BMH1. We're both more than happy to answer continuous provision questions. My Instagram account is the same. Wrap it up. I'll go back to what I said. You need to respect the fact that play isn't a subject. It's going to be the vehicle for learning. It's going to be the thing that's going to support your children to accessing that. You know, it is a wonderful curriculum. It has its faults. It really does have its faults. But the vehicle is going to be through play. So again, as I would always like to do, I'd just like to say thank you to Ben for giving up I know he's had a busy day over the 2 schools that he's running. So thank you to him for, inspiring me to take this on board and letting me do that whole trial and error thing, because it didn't go right the first time, and, supporting going forward. And thank you for coming. Goodbye.